All right, you tell me how a week can get any better. All right, a win over Georgia, a 5-star flip. It's good to be a rebel. All right, Ole Miss Live. Here we are for a 10th edition right here at the Voice of College Football. I got Ruby Dreher right next to me, Leanne Herring, of course. Two excellent co-hosts, so I'm in a good spot. And so is Ole Miss when it comes to the SEC race and the college football playoff race. Ruby, how you doing?
I'm doing so great. What a week. I unfortunately wasn't in Oxford. I was heading back from Baton Rouge from the LSU-Alabama game, and I got on my flight really nervous, thinking like maybe I should just not watch the game because then I'll be less of a basket case, but ended up turning it on a Southwest exit row, no headphones, just purely watching the plays. I had no idea when Jackson Dart left the game, what had happened or what was going to be going on. So it was a good one, trying to like keep my hands together, especially that last fourth quarter of like, don't panic. I'm watching my people start texting me like around that 3-minute mark when they're in the red zone. And I'm texting my coworkers back like, everyone shut up right now. Like, you never know what's going to happen. Don't move. Don't say anything. We'll talk after the game. So it was a really good week to be a rebel.
Okay, Leanne.
It was a really good week to be. I was there at the game, and I know we were talking a little bit before we came on. It was just really surreal, like Ruby said, no matter where you were, if you were in the stands at Vaught Hemingway. I mean, the rain let up. We didn't know how this was going to go. There was a few times, like we talked about, Mark, in the post-game show, where it seemed like Georgia was going to do Georgia things. But like I said, for once, you know, the Rebels were able to change on course. I'll say it like I did on Saturday. We said on the post-game Sunday, they stood on business. They handled business on the front end and they closed on the back end, and it made all the difference. Like you said, Ruby, like most of us Rebel fans or anybody who's watched this team over the course of the last couple seasons, even in that 3-minute mark when we knew that it was in our hands, we still kind of had that pass, you know, because anything could happen. Of course, when Jackson Dart went out, you know, we were up in the suites, and you know, everybody was texting, you know, he's out, and it was a panic mode because, like we've seen so many times, like we talked about it, Mark. You know, Jackson Dart has been a vital part of this offense. He's developed, he's grown with this team, and you know, when he went out, of course, we've seen it happen over the weeks, not just outside Ole Miss, when you lose your starting guy or when there's that possibility, you know, offenses break down. I was talking about it last week. I mean, Arkansas was a perfect example when they lost Halen Green. You know, even though their backup came in, was able to do some things, it was a little too late. So, but give it to Austin Simmons that came up. We talked about it. That drive, I mean, you were watching it, Ruby, even from the flight. I mean, talk about having confidence. And I think you want to talk and shed a little bit of light on that, what that drive did for the Rebels. I mean, I think it showed Kip had confidence, regardless whether Jackson Dart was able to come back in at the time. But that drive, beautifully constructed by that offense. Kudos to Kiffin and Charlie Weiss. I bet everyone's on the bandwagon again now with Ole Miss and the Rebels. But yeah, great week to be a Rebel.
For sure. I mean, that first drive, you know, you see Jackson go down and throw the interception, and you're kind of panicking a little bit. And when he gets up to limp off, like my immediate thought was that Sugar Bowl in 2022, when like we had the momentum, everything was good, and Matt Corral goes down. And it's kind of, you know, until Jackson Dart came back out, it was that same, like, we're not going to win this game because like our quarterback, our system quarterback, everything, he's out. And to see Austin Simmons, like, not only step up into a game where, like, welcome to the SEC, welcome to college football. We have a 17-year-old kid going in there and scoring a touchdown, just completely dominating this Georgia defense. And to see that, it kind of gave me a little bit of hope of like, okay, is this a fluke or, you know, what's going to happen? And then to see Jackson Dart come back out. But yeah, I don't think that we're talking enough about Austin Simmons, what that drive did for the Ole Miss offense and defense, for the team as a whole. Like, yeah, you can do it. Depth matters. This is what we've been wanting this entire season. You know, Kiffin talked about it a lot after that Georgia loss last year, but it just changed the momentum of the game of it's not the end of the world. We can do this. Obviously, it was really nice to have Jackson come back out, but, you know, Austin Simmons is awesome.
And it's a great point. And Leanne and I talked about it right after the game, because that's what really overwhelmed me about this performance and how remarkable it was. Because if we were sitting here last week, did I give Ole Miss a shot? Absolutely. I would have said, okay, how late did they score to win this game? You know, did they kick a game-winning field? You know, did Lane need to go for it on 4th down 4 at the 10-yard line. What did they do to pull it off? No, they dominated the game. And even with that adversity right out of the gate, there's all this hype and tension and energy in the stadium. And then your star quarterback goes down. You're down 7-zip. It's Georgia, and we know that they don't lose to anybody not named Alabama 52 straight. Like how much can go wrong in the span of just a couple minutes to start a game? But yeah, Austin Simmons comes in, and most people would expect 3 plays and a punt right there because your backup quarterback, you're just trying to get maybe Jackson Dart back. And he leads a 10-play drive. And what Leanne and I talked about as well is that Lane Kiffin, I'm sure he modified the play call slightly, but they threw it 6 out of 10 plays on that drive. So they let him operate the offense. That was impressive.
For sure. And I think typically sometimes Kiffin and Charlie Weiss get a little conservative in those kind of big moments. And that's been a big critique of mine of, you're up against LSU, like keep going, they don't just run the ball. And they didn't. They gave the kid a shot, and he just like destroyed the Georgia defense. I don't know how else to say it. Like it was so shocking to me how, like you said, they gave him a chance and that he was able to not only complete passes, but even it up, get on the board.
And that was a great point that you brought. Not only was it a long, calculated, meticulous, like beautiful drive, but like you said, it showed us the future of Ole Miss, the Ole Miss offense with a young kid that got in a big game that it could have gone either way. But another thing I was glad to see that we've all talked about was not only did it open up a little bit of the run game, but it also showed Simmons being able to pass and the ability for. And I said it from the jump. I think that our strongest games that we played in through this season were at South Carolina and Arkansas when we won the game on the backs, especially on the offense, of multiple players. Jordan Watkins had a great brand day in Arkansas, but we also had a lot of other guys step up. And I think that the one thing that we talked about, it was the response and the next man up mentality that these boys seem to be playing with has really, I think, been we minimize mistakes. Was it the best performance? It's never going to be the best performance, but it was a really good performance. It was effective. I mean, this offensive line did a lot better than what we expected. And I know we talked about it, Mark and I, and then you shed light on it too, and I always say that, for Jackson Dart to be able to capitalize and those receivers to be able to get those red zones and make those plays, whether it's, through the air or on the ground, everybody's got to do their job. And it was good to see the offensive line be more tight knit and, not be elite. I always said our offensive line doesn't have to be as elite as our defense because, talk about winning that game in the trenches with just 4 guys and no blitzing, but that's something we'll get to. But our offensive line, you got to give them credit because them cleaning up the mistakes and the hesitations that they've had really allowed Jackson Dart and then Austin Simmons and, to be able to get this offensive going. Like you said, we thought, I thought it was going to be a close game. We thought Georgia was going to be able to get in here and, just manhandle in the trenches. But again, like Mark said, on Sunday on the post game, we flipped the script. Last year, Georgia manhandled us. I believe, like you alluded to last week's show, this is a turning point for us. I believe that Georgia last year was a turning point for us to fill deficit and need, and we saw it in manifest in fruition, in week 11.
The thing about last year, Georgia just demolishing us, like they put up so many points on offense, and I feel like this year we didn't dominate them on offense, but it was like a slow death of 1,000 paper cuts is what we did to Georgia. And to watch the offense not really be able to put up any numbers, Georgia's defensive front wasn't that good this game, which statistically and historically, they're pretty dang good. The Georgia defense is amazing. And I know we talked about it last week of, Georgia doesn't give up explosive plays. Georgia isn't going to let us get those 20 plus passes off and, all those things they did. So I don't know if it's a credit more to, the Ole Miss offense finally being able to put those pieces together and having that Arkansas under their belt, just massive points there. But they just did whatever they wanted kind of. And the score didn't really reflect that as much as when you're watching the game. But I just think like Ole Miss did whatever they wanted, and especially on defense. But even on offense, they had a pretty good run game. They got to spread the wealth around. Caden Lee had a great game. Juice Wells got a touchdown. And I think that kind of begs the question. We had Trey Harris out, who is the SEC receiving leader, and he's great, all those things. Is the Ole Miss offense better when Trey Harris isn't in?
I'm glad you bring up that point. Mark made the thing, a lot of people I talk with, it's not that you don't want someone like Trey Harris in there, but I saw it against the Kentucky put up a great front and forced Jackson Dart and Trey Harris to be the only connection in that Ole Miss offense. And I really think that that's what stopped us from being able to achieve, because you can't help but admit there's a comfort zone. It's like Jamar Chase to Joey Burrow. That's that comfort zone that Trey Harris, but again, was him being in that offense, in our offense, like you said, was it the death of the Ole Miss offense? Was it stopping us? Because we've seen it, like you said, we have Jordan Watkins, who's just as elite up there and has made a great impact. But again, we've seen when Jordan Watkins is in the mix, the ball is getting distributed to other guys. So I feel like when Trey Harris is in, as much as you don't want him out there, I feel like when we get in a tight situation or when the opposing defense puts us up against the wall, it can kind of go either way. Trey Harris is going to make a play, but if he's your only go-to guy because the defense has got so much coverage on that, what does Ole Miss do? So I'm glad that you brought that up and said that. And I don't know how you feel about it, Mark, watching all these weeks, but I feel like, you don't want Trey Harris to be out, but at the same time, Trey Harris to be out, it's that step up, that next man up mentality. And I feel like because we've gone out there and recruited depth, why do we not do that if we're not going to utilize all that? So I agree with you right there, Ruby, on that point.
Well, I think what happens sometimes, and this doesn't speak specifically to Ole Miss, because I really can't answer that question. Obviously, as you both said, Trey Harris is amazing. He's one of the best wide receivers in college football. But we've seen it with other teams. What tends to happen is quarterback gets locked on to his favorite target, and so he doesn't necessarily properly read the progressions as he would normally, because he knows that's my guy. I'm probably going to go over there, and it skews his thinking. Other guys are uninvolved, then they check out. We know that wide receivers are more apt to possibly check out if they're running route after route after route, and the quarterback's not looking their way. The defense can skew its coverages, really lock down on one guy. And yeah, it sometimes has hampered offenses in the past when there's one guy that's too dominant, and then that guy gets taken away, and suddenly the quarterback, I've got all these other options, and now I'm going to go back to where I'm supposed to be running through my progressions and going the best direction for that particular play, that particular coverage, and not just thinking in the back of my mind, that's my guy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we also need to mention, obviously Henry Parrish Jr. was out for this game, but Ulysses Bentley also had another great game. And there's been a lot of talk about, Kiffin and head running back coach Kevin Smith, whether, what the situation was there when, Bentley was kind of our guy along with Q last year, but just another great running game, and not perfect, not elite, not exactly what you would want, but enough. And I just have to give credit to him as well for this game.
No doubt. And like I said, to talk about Logan Diggs being back, that's another, he's an explosive player, him being out ACL, I think he's going on 11 months healing now. Usually takes about 9 months to. So, that could be another impact player. Ulysses Bentley was a Houston talent, Houston talented kid, played at CC King, watched him, before he came to Ole Miss. He was someone I was excited about, but like you said, it's good to see other guys step up. I think it's important. Like I said, why go recruit all these players and have this depth if you're not going to utilize them? I think that, going down the stretch, I think we got so spoiled early on in Kiffin's career with the offenses we have, with all these explosive plays, these Star Wars number. But like you said, at the end of the day, to make the gauntlet with the schedule, with what you're going to have to go through, try to stay healthy. This late stretch in the SEC. We look across the board in the conference. A lot of key players going down. It can change the game. So just trying to stay healthy and make the run is not always putting the biggest numbers. It's about getting things done. And I think that, that was a big key component in this win, is that I think of all the seasons that we've had under Kip, and just looking at Ole Miss historically, I think the response in every situation, like in key moments when we saw Georgia, with the fumble, and it looked like it was going to go how we responded. I think we played a lot more aggressively. There were times we played more conservatively and everything, but I think overall the play calling in this game on both sides of the ball was just spot on, because I think, we spread the wealth offensively, but we didn't let off the gas. And I think that we came to this aggressively. We got things done. We weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. We weren't trying to do, something outside of the ball. We took calculated risk. And I think at the end of the day, like Ruby said, it wasn't the best performance. It wasn't elite. It wasn't these crazy numbers. We didn't go out there and smash Georgia, but we got it done. We handled business. We stood on business. And I think I think when we do that, we see the best results that we've seen, And I mean, we kind of talked about it, Mark, on the Sunday show. And Ruby, I don't know how you feel about. I know everybody hates to lose. Nobody wants to lose to LSU. If you're an Ole Miss fan, nobody, of course, expected us to lose at Kentucky at home. But I really think that those two losses coming into the way that they played out early in the season, I really think helped change the course. Because I told Mark, I feel like if we hadn't gone into this Georgia game with a loss on our hands, I felt like we probably wouldn't have played with such urgency or aggression, and it would have been a different storyline coming out of Saturday in Oxford.
Absolutely. I mean, the loss to Kentucky was brutal. But I think when you think about, you losing to LSU in Death Valley, it's a very difficult place to play. Before Alabama beat them this week, Brian Kelly was 7-0 in Death Valley night games. Like it's hard. It's a hard place to play, arguably the hardest place in the country to play at night. But I was thinking about it this week as we were talking, about playoff and how that was looking. If Ole Miss does lose to that Kentucky game, that fluke, really weird game, if they go to LSU and they beat LSU in Death Valley, but they lose to Georgia, I don't think they get into the playoffs. And so, like you said, it was a turning point for Jackson Dart and the leadership of this team. And I think it was, really important for them to kind of figure that out before this Georgia game and have a convincing win over a really good team. But I wouldn't have changed it had we won in Baton Rouge. I don't think that we obviously would have won against Georgia, just the way that Ole Miss goes. So I'm happy with how the season has played out so far. And looking down the stretch, heading to the Swamp in Florida. Thank goodness Florida isn't like a super good team this week, and that we do have a bye to get healthy and continue that momentum. But yeah, the state game on the day after Thanksgiving on Friday is going to be an interesting one for sure. I think we're all Ole Miss fans historically are going to be holding our breaths for that one. But yeah.
Jackson Dart, Jackson Johnson. I'm surrounded by Jacksons. Jackson, thank you so much for reminding me. Here's the latest edition right here. Appreciate you checking this one out, everyone. It's Disputed National Champions. It's a historical reset of the 1990s. So we dissect the 1990s, which to me was the most impactful decade in college football in regards to determining championship, and preceded all the BCS on into the college football playoff era. This is not just a history book. We take each season, we take the results, and we plug it into the BCS, the 14 playoff era, the 12 team, and the proposed 14. And it's a fun book. So give it a look. It's on Amazon, and the link is in the chat. It's also down in the description section of the video. Think about this. If Ole Miss doesn't beat Georgia, that word that's been mentioned a couple times in some of these sentences, Ruby slayed it out there a few times. It's called playoff. We'd be like 3 losses. We'd be concocting like the wildest. I'm sure there would be Ole Miss fans out there, and I get it, because every fan base wants to keep hope alive as long as possible. We'd be concocting the most ridiculous scenarios to try to weave them into a playoff, but it would basically be dead. But that's not what happened. It was a dominant win over Georgia. And this team is well and alive and fighting for a playoff spot at number 11. So, Leanne, what were your thoughts when the College Football Playoff Committee made its selections available?
For me, I was kind of looking forward, to kind of see where they were going to put us in, because we all know, Ole Miss fans know that even when we do well, they still kind of put us low in there. They still try to punch us even up when we're down. So, I felt I didn't think they were going to put us past 10. I felt like it was going to be between the 10, 11 range. So I think we stood kind of where we were. I think that they have us projecting now in that first round against Penn State, which of course, would be a Peach Bowl rematch. So I know that's got a lot of Ole Miss fans excited. But again, it's like I said, the next 2 weeks, I couldn't say that the bye week came at a better time. It gives us time to, keep the momentum, as much as I don't want to put a damper on what Ole Miss did and Lane Kiffin did with the signature win against Georgia. We can't put our guard down. There's no time to rest. I think we're going to have to go into the swamp aggressive because, a part of, the college playoff, like we said, so many people are going to try to knock on the door, and obviously we have to win out, no question. I mean, I know that like you said, there's a lot of people out there talking about that 3-loss team sense nonsense. I just, in a utopia, in a perfect world, that'd be ideal, but not in Ole Miss's case. So the next 2 games are going to be critical for us. Thank God, like Ruby said, we're not getting the best Florida team. DJ Lagway, as much faith as I've had on him and what he's done at Florida, he's coming back to the game. They're saying he's possibly returns this week, but we don't know how healthy he really is. So, that's in the best favor of Ole Miss because, like I said, DJ Lagway, can put Florida on his back. But again, with this defensive front, the way it's been performing for Ole Miss, give kudos to that. But I think right now, it's going to count, and we can't put our guard down. I mean, we're going to have to go into this week, obviously, relaxed, but we're going to have to treat Florida as if Florida is up, and they're going to come and try to put the beat down on us, because I think if we don't approach it aggressively like we did Georgia, and we allow the little mistakes to happen, that's where Ole Miss has also historically had trouble. It's when we get the penalties, we get the turnovers, we let the little things, we let our guard down for just a minute. And Florida, even though Florida is not as good as it has been, or it has some trouble. We've seen it happen. Look at what happened at Oklahoma. I mean, we thought Oklahoma was going to be an easy run, and that first half was a bit of a shakeup for us. So again, we can't go into this game, and like Ruby said, that last game, of course, Ole Miss, and State at the Egg Bowl, that's a spoiler. Those guys could be playing the worst ball of their life, but come that game, all the mentality, the momentum. I mean, people are just looking to spoil Ole Miss's party. I mean, in the next, like Jackson said, every game we play on here on out is a playoff elimination game, so the next 2 games for us are going to be critical, and not, like I said, not to rain on the party or anything. But we can't put our guard down. We won the party. It's great. Give ourselves a pat on the back, but time to get back to work and continue to stand on business.
Absolutely. And the swamp is not an easy place to play, especially with a Florida team and fan base who was calling for their head coach's job and in replacement for our head coach's job. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they play. And again, like you said, we cannot go in there kind of like, oh, this is going to be an easy game, whatever it is. If we run the ball 3 times in the red zone, I'm going to freaking lose my mind. So Charlie Weiss, hopefully you're going to listen to this at some point and don't play conservatively. I just think continue that aggression. I was personally pretty shocked that the playoff committee put Ole Miss above Georgia. While yes, we deserve to be there. Typically Georgia gets a little bit of a pass on some of these things. So it was great to see us above them. But yeah, I mean, just continuing to win out that Egg Bowl with former offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby versus Lane Kiffin is going to be quite the matchup. And yeah, the rivalry games are just, I'm still a little bit nervous. While we're in a good spot, rivalry games are just crazy always, even though it's at home. Thank goodness.
Have either of you checked out the SEC standings? This is crazy. Now that we don't have divisions anymore, a lot of these teams don't play each other. And I did a breakdown video before last weekend's games, and I was thinking, okay, we got 8 or 9 teams in play. We still have 3 to 4 games left, depending on the team. They have to be playing a ton of games against each other. And I mapped out the whole thing. And there were only like 4 games left between these teams. And so look all the way down at LSU. People discount LSU because they're looking at the overall record, thinking, well, they lost 3 games, they're out of the playoff. If LSU wins out, they just need Texas to either, what's the formula? They need Arkansas to either beat Missouri or Texas, just one or the other, and LSU will be going to the SEC championship game.
Let them.
Oh, it's a crazy thing. Where I was looking at the tiebreaker rules and all these sorts of things that we have. I mean, it's just crazy. Like you said, what a difference a season makes, like when we don't have the East and the West and they're not separated. And like I said, you got Texas coming to town, and Texas is trying to make, they may be the rookie guys and the new boys on the block, but they're trying to make a statement. But like you said, I mean, Georgia playing Tennessee, Nico's, I mean, there's just so many crazy scenarios. Like I said, there's a lot of ball to be played, no doubt.
If Georgia beats Tennessee and Texas A&M beats Texas and the rest is chalk, we will have an 8-way tie for first place.
It's pretty crazy.
I know. I mean, it's pretty crazy. You can't make that stuff up, like they said, and it's just different. But it just goes to show, and when I've been on a couple other shows, and I know, Ruby, you work around different, the circuit, and you talk with people outside the conference. I mean, you can vouch for teams in the Big Ten and all that kind of stuff. But man, the gauntlet that the SEC, the kind of conference play, that we have is just it's something different. I mean, like it says, it's built different over here in the SEC, and not to sound like an SEC homer, as they say, but I mean, really what you do, I mean, it's tough to be in this conference. I mean, we could go undefeated if we weren't playing the schedule that we played, because even the guy at the bottom of the barrel here in the SEC still has to run a tough gauntlet. But like you said, I mean, look at LSU. I mean, that's just a perfect example. I mean, Texas A&M for a minute. These were guys that we held out. Brian Kelly, start out perfect and, dipped in the dip. But look, like you said, there's still a chance that it's just crazy how it all plays out because of toughness. And, and you can't help but look at that, when you're in the CFP and you look at the schedule of the SEC. I know a lot of people always talk about, the SEC bringing in so many teams, but you got to look at the kind of schedule we play versus other teams and other conferences.
So is it going to be my role on this show to push back for everybody else to stand up for the rest of college football? Is that going to be my spot?
Probably, because I'm an SEC homer as well. I mean, 9 SEC teams in the top 25 and 5 of them in the top 10, up in the top 12. It's wild.
Okay.
So.
You bring the voice of reason. You bring the voice of reason, Mark, to the show. You're to let us know. And I think too. I mean, with the playoff system, I think that's why we expanded the playoff. And I think you make the case now. Do we expand it even more? Because I mean, there's a lot of good teams you got to give credit to, like IU and other teams that are making a run as well.
So my voice of reason this week is going to be, unless I see something to change my mind, the SEC is the best conference in college football. It has been for 15 to 20 years. It is the best conference top to bottom. It's the best conference 1 through 8 or 9, because we see the standings right there. That's basically include those teams and then throw in maybe South Carolina, who's played really well. I don't know that anyone would want to play South Carolina right now. That it's the best top half of a conference in college football as well. I don't know. We're going to see when the very, very top of these conferences get together, if Oregon, Ohio State versus, that's what's great about the SEC. We don't know who that's going to be. We thought it was going to be Georgia. Then we thought it was going to be Alabama. Then we thought it could be Ole Miss. It could be Texas A&M. It could be Texas. That could come out as the best or the top 2 or 3 teams in the SEC. So the SEC is deeper. There's no question, top to bottom, and also top to top half. But the couple best in the Big Ten might make it very interesting in terms of a national championship or a semifinal situation.
Absolutely. But when you're looking at that ranking, I know this is probably going to sound pretty cocky of me, but I wouldn't want to play Oregon and I wouldn't want to play Ohio State. The rest of the top 10, though, oh my gosh, Indiana, BYU, I would take that in a second. The current slate, if the playoffs were today and everything was over, Ole Miss has to travel to Happy Valley and play Penn State. And then if they win that, they go to Provo and play BYU. That's like a dream scenario for Ole Miss fans. I think there isn't anybody in the fan base that wouldn't be happy with those matchups.
And right now that I talk about Houston a lot because I spent a lot of time recruiting in Houston and talking about, because we get a lot of guys out from there. But I mean, talk about, and University of Houston's always kind of been one of those outside teams, knocking it. But man, they go close the season out at BYU, so all those Ole Miss fans are going to be hoping that Houston can pull off an upset, and just change up the game. Because like you said, when you talk about, I mean, in football, you're not used to hearing Indiana. You're not used to hearing BYU and, places like basketball and other things and all that, of course. But like you said, it would be a dream scenario for Ole Miss to set it up. And like you talked about and you alluded to it earlier, I wouldn't change how the path to get here, because like I said, I think whether we come in with a 2 or 1 loss, I think had we not come in a loss, we wouldn't play Georgia different. Like you said, had we not come in here, I don't think, like I said, I don't think we would be in the conversation. I think that, it would be a lot different the path to get here. So like they said, it all works itself out, even in the losses. But I think that, we saw a turn. I mean, Jackson Dart, we saw everybody always going back to, criticize him for being in that hoodie after the LSU game. But I mean, him being aggressive, we need that. You need that kind of guy, having your back and being the leader of your offense. You want him to play with aggression. And I mean, I don't know about you, Ruby and Mark, but I said it, in the Arkansas game, that second half of Oklahoma, we saw that kind of peak of him, of just changing we know he's a lighthearted kid. We know, that he's out there. He's got a great personality. But I mean, that Oklahoma second, yeah, and then from here on out, there's just been a really aggressive, in a good way, that he's really commanded this offense and took charge of it, and I think, like, because we've all been on the sidelines, and I think that whatever energy, your leadership, whether it's your coaches, whether it's your quarterback, they feed off of that. So if they feel like that you're in a nervous situation or you're uneasy, they play like that. But I think that that's really helped, that offensive step up, having Jackson be, not just a commanding presence, but just playing aggressively and saying like, hey, we're still in this, we got this, and putting everything at ease.
Absolutely. And I disagree with a lot of the Ole Miss fan base. After the LSU game, for, casual listeners, when Jackson Dart lost, he came out in a hoodie and he did his press conference and he was visibly distraught. And as a fan and as a supporter of this organization, I would prefer if our starting quarterback and the main leader of this offense and team as a collective was very upset about that loss. And while, yes, he had a good game and there are things that we could have done differently and, whatever it was, for him to go in there and take all of the blame and say, like, we have to win out. We have to win out. We have to do better. And then to come out and do what he did in Georgia, like, I can't imagine the pain that he went through. I don't know what they gave him. And we saw his ankle taped up pretty aggressively, probably a cortisol shot or whatever it was. But for him to, like, take it on and change it and call the team meeting and figure out a way to win, I think is exactly what you want from a veteran leader. So I was very happy with Jackson. He just absolutely came out. I can't imagine the pain that he was in after that LSU game, and then physical pain after that first drive of this Georgia game. And just to come out and do what he did was just a massive credit to him and his leadership.
No doubt.
Yeah, many times the way players present themselves to fans, it's just a fan mindset that regardless of what they do, they're going to criticize it. So if the players seem to be taking the loss okay, like we're getting past it, we're good, we're going to move on from here. Oh, well, they don't care enough. They're not emotional enough. Then if they're too emotional, then, we'd like them to be more in control. And why are they getting so emotional? They need to button it up. And so that is sometimes just a losing proposition, regardless of how you present yourself to some fans. They expect perfection or they expect some kind of ideal. But this Ole Miss team obviously responded, and it was extremely impressive from an outside perspective of a guy that just watches college football and has covered college football for a long, long time. It was just an impressive performance from all aspects. And as Leanne and I talked about after the game, even when Ole Miss would make a mistake, like, for example, they get the sack on Carson Beck that forces the fumble that stops the drive. Cash Jones picks it up. He gets the face mask. They stop that. Nope, that gives Georgia, of course, a second life. Nope, Ole Miss just clamps it down, stops him again. A lot of the times, if you give Georgia second life, then you're going to pay. But when you've dominated a game to that degree, that doesn't even throw you off, those kind of plays that happened a few times. If you look at the second half, Georgia started to move the ball. They had a 70, a 64, and a 46-yard drive. But once they got into the red zone, The Ole Miss defense clamped them down, stopped the drive, made a big play.
For sure. And Ole Miss defense, we've kind of waited to talk about them, but now's the time because that defensive line absolutely won us the game. And we talked about it leading up into the week that was going to be the turning point. That was what's going to matter. And Leanne, you had great points about what that defensive line needed to do. And they did that and more for me. And I just think, we talk about Jared Ivey and Princely Umami-Ellen and what they were able to do, but there are so many other outside people and more depth. Suntarine Perkins had an amazing day. Walter Nolan, who typically is the star of the show, kind of took a back seat in terms of statistics, but I think how disruptive he was, it can't be measured.
And I think that's how you win ball games with all that. You have the stars of the show. You have your guys that are always going to stand out, like you said, the Walter Nolan. But it was great to see Walter Nolan step back. But Suntarine Perkins, I mean, talk about a kid who's really stepped up and showed out and brought, I know we talk a lot about we go to the portal, but I mean, when you see guys like Suntarine Perkins, a hometown kid, and it just goes to show that when you go make an investment on the recruiting trail, not just outside the portal, but, one of your own in the high school circuit, I mean, and they pan out for you. I mean, it's just great to see. And, they just utilized Suntarine Perkins kind of like that spy kind of guy, as I like to call him. I mean, he's really just been a lot of trickery on that defense. But I think what was real, I mean, we've talked about it through the course. Our defensive front on all aspects has kept us in these tough matches, even in these losses where it could have been a lot worse for us against LSU or Kentucky. They kept us in the game. But I mean, talk about what was really impressive for me that I think we all saw across the board was that our front four guys in this one, I mean, virtually no blitzing came out. And what those defensive guys did on the front end, it was just spectacular. I mean, being able to do this and doing what they did to that Georgia offense was just, like I said, I mean, there's really no word. Proof is in the pudding. I mean, you could see it there. I mean, just watching from the up top, looking down on the field from this in Oxford. I mean, it was just, the meticulous movement in the trenches, I mean, on both sides of the ball. But like I said, what our defensive did, because I think every game, what makes them even more elite is they bring more to the table. They just, if it couldn't be any more possible, they find a way to step up and find ways to win and make it matter. Like you said, Mark, I mean, those drives, it looked like Georgia was going to come back. They were going to stick it to us, a nice slow death with those run games. But again, they couldn't make points happen at the end of the drive. So that just speaks volumes to Pete Golding. And Randall Joyner is a name we don't hear a lot about. I mean, he's gone out there and recruited well for our defensive front, our defensive line coach. So, I mean, that whole defensive unit and that coaching staff have really done a tremendous job in keeping Ole Miss in the hunt. But, I mean, every week we just see them play out even more and just get more elite. But like Ruby said, it's not just on the back of one guy. I mean, all our unit has completely helped us be a better team overall and help us get where we are. So, I mean, talk about a win every week in the trenches for us.
For sure. And I think, watching that game, there were a lot of third and long situations, whatever the variable was. Some of those were false starts on that Georgia offense due to the amazing Vaught crowd, which I know Kirby talked about later, that was one of the best atmospheres and all those things. But, typically like our corners and safeties are very good, but Georgia has a lot of weapons. And so when you give Carson Beck time, that he can kind of make you pay for that. And so I think I was watching a lot of that and it just didn't matter because the defensive line just got to Carson Beck on the situations where it really mattered. Sorry for my language, but Carson Beck was in hell that entire game. And that was credit to all of our defensive line and the elite coaching from defensive line coach Randall Joyner, who has been one of those guys and one of the only coaches who has stuck around for, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of Lane Kiffin's tenure at Ole Miss, he's been here that whole time. And I think that that's a credit to him. And that's why they've been so good, is they've been able to develop those guys. And with the transfer portal and the way that NIL works, for Perkins to stay around this entire time is also a credit to him. When he could have left and he kind of wasn't given that starting role that he was promised. He's a young guy as well, so it's coming. But for him to just say, I'll play wherever you want. You want me to spy? You want me to rush? Whatever it is. And I just think as a collective whole, they just completely dominated.
Isn't it the phrase "give them hell" in one of those hotty toddy chants? It's got to be in there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Hell yeah, damn right.
There you go. Okay, that's what I thought. I'd forgotten. Our guy Troy, look at this. So Troy just ordered my book. Thank you for that, Troy. And he used the Amazon link. Now, that's phenomenal, Troy. So Troy uses the Amazon link. So everyone, when you shop on Amazon, please use our link. It's in the description section. But he also bought my book using the Amazon link. Troy, you are the star of the day here in my book. Not that book, but my book. Gotcha.
Awesome.
All right, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We got Ruby Dreher here, of course. Leanne's here for a 10th consecutive show. We love having Ruby here now for a second time. So this is our team covering Ole Miss football here every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time with all of you. Get used to checking us out on the Ole Miss channel. So please check it out. Jackson has dropped the link there in the chat. All right. Knowing how crazy people are about recruiting, I am guessing that there will be some Ole Miss fans watching this show thinking, well, none of that is the biggest news of the week, because the way the news cycle works these days, shoot, if that was like 3 hours ago, that was like a long time ago. So yeah, we beat Georgia, big deal. We're done with that. Let's go. All right, Caleb Cunningham, Leanne, wide receiver out of Choctaw, Mississippi. And he's one of the best in the nation, third ranked according to 247 Sports Composite. And he is a rebel.
He is a rebel. This is one that I've been hoping and praying for. This is one that we've been talking about that I felt like, he was obviously committed to Alabama. Alabama took a couple of our guys out there, but I think that it was a testament, like I said, not only when we win big games and we're in big atmospheres like this, when, you can talk about it in the recruiting trail, coaches can call, they can send letters, but I really think when players and prospects really experience the atmosphere that is in Oxford, they'll all tell you, Ruby, you've heard this time and time again, it's like none other. And I don't think that Lane Kiffin and his staff could have set up a better recruiting stage than what they did in Georgia. I mean, the elements, everything. We saw Deuce Knight, He's another kid that we've been kind of teeter-tottering with, a quarterback, also Mississippi kid. He was committed to Notre Dame. He's currently committed at Auburn. He showed up surprisingly. There was a lot of elite prospects and 4-stars. Caleb Cunningham also, he had already been there, the visit before the last home game. And then for him to return, even though he was committed to Alabama, was huge. We knew that we were making waves. And then finally, just about an hour ago and everything, I texted Mark and I said, we might be a little bit late to the show because we have our second flip in the SIP after Georgia, of course, earlier this week. We were able to flip Auburn commit, which is big. Of course, if you're an Ole Miss fan base and you all know what's going on in Auburn, and when you can take one from Hugh Freeze in Auburn, that's also another nice win. Dante Core is another 3-star that we were able to flip after the Georgia game. And of course, commitment wise, we got our first 2026 recruit, another kid from Florida, Zion Legree. He committed. He was there at the game, very close with Ladarian Clardy, who's one of our Ole Miss commits for this season. Ladarian Clardy, Hayden Bradley, Bryson Walters, a lot of our Telly Graham were, on site. As much as the coaches do their recruiting, when it comes time to game time and everything, a lot of our commits and other guys, this is a small circuit, a small time. So, they were really pushing for a lot of these kids. And I know a lot of our commits, a lot of people that are close with Caleb Cunningham, as far as, athletes and prospects, were really hoping for this slip. And then here we are, long and behold, Lane Kiffin. We finally got our guy back. I mean, when you watch his kid, he is just super elite. He oozes athleticism. I mean, he's a player that you can't help but see. Of course, he's as much as he's focused on his recruitment, his team right now, they're 10-1 overall in Choctaw. They play this weekend. They play this Friday. They're number 1 in their district here in Mississippi. So he's trying to lead his state titles. You see all those stats there. I mean, the kid can put up numbers not only on the turf, but on the hardwood, pretty elite players. So like I said, we're going to be recruited as a wide receiver. I'm really excited about this. I'm hoping that Keelan Russell, you're listening to this, and I know that Ole Miss has been in your heart, but I would like to see Keelan Russell also flip to the SIP and maybe join Caleb Cunningham. I think that would be the next Jamar Chase, Joey Burrow combo, but here in Oxford. So like I said, a huge win on the recruiting trail. I believe that we're not done here as far as commitments and prospects. I believe that heading into this next couple of days, we're probably going to see some more commitments, perhaps another flip or two. But like I said, Ruby, you know firsthand how big this is as far as when you can keep an in-state talent. I think, early on in Lane's career, when he first arrived at Ole Miss, we knew that Mississippi had a lot of talented kids. I just don't think we were hitting them as hard as far as keeping them here and recruiting them. But during Cam Franklin's year, Centurion Perkins' year, a lot of these Mississippi kids were getting a lot of momentum. Will Eccles was another kid, that they were going out into these camps, and I think that the state of Mississippi really got a lot more credibility when they were seeing these kids going to these camps that you normally didn't see a lot of Mississippi kids, like Caleb Cunningham and everything. So there's always been a lot of talent here in the SIP. But I think now, these last couple of recruiting cycles, we've really seen it because these kids are, getting out there, going to these big games, these big camps, being on 7-on-7. So again, this is a huge win for Ole Miss as far as, building up on this recruiting class. And with a flip like this, Mark and Ruby, you both know that this not only helps us for this recruiting class, but for those 2026s and 2027s that are they're ready to shut down and close down. It seems like it's far away, but on the recruitment trail, it's not. When you can lock in these guys, and I do believe that Caleb Cunningham flipping back and coming home back to the SIP is going to be huge in this 2025 class. I wouldn't be surprised if he brings a couple guys along the way here. So I think this is a huge, recruiting move for Ole Miss here.
For sure. And Leanne, you alluded to it, but I worked in recruiting in the 2019 season under Matt Luke, and then when Kiffin took over in 2020. And one of the biggest things that we talked about is all we have to do is get the kids to Oxford. And that's all it takes. I think it's the same for college students in general, and then as well as athletes. Once you experience Ole Miss and Oxford as a whole, it's really hard to go anywhere else. And obviously I have a little bit of bias, but I talked about this last week too. Like you go to these other college campuses, and yes, they're awesome. They're great. Their football programs are fun, and there's different things, but there's just something about Oxford that just changes it. And so for an in-state guy who was going to go to Alabama to now flip is massive for us. And I think it's also very nice that Nick Saban isn't around anymore, because he was an elite recruiter and typically stole a lot of those Mississippi guys from us. I'm really excited for Caleb Cunningham, and I'm excited for pen to paper.
No, exactly. You've worked in recruiting. So like you said, it's about when you bring kids to Oxford and building relationships, but just, I was looking over some of the quotes and stuff. You talk to the recruits and they talk about the atmosphere. They were just talking about how electric it was, seeing that win against Georgia. They're sharing videos, when they're storming the field. And like I said, Lane Kiffin couldn't have written a better script, set a better stage as far as the recruiting trail, because when you win big games like this, you not only win on the turf, but you win on the recruiting trail. And like I said, as much as Lane Kiffin is known for his portal prowess, and you've been there, you've watched it firsthand, Ruby, directly with the program, and I've watched it from the outside looking in, scouting, for us as well. It's a lot. It's a lot a lot of factors go in these days as far as recruiting. You got NIL, you got so many other influences, you got coaches and relationships, and recruiting is just a different dynamic. So, but when you go to Oxford, when you experience Ole Miss, all the players that I talk to as far as that we've gotten or that show interest, they talk about the relationships that the coaches build with them, but they talk about the atmosphere that they get to experience and how they can see themselves in there. And I think that, as much as we talk about, Lane can be on the horn with them. They can get letters, they can get mail, but until you're there, until you experience it, and these kids and their families can picture themselves there, it's a different dynamic. So like I said, this Georgia win was not only big on the recruiting on the turf, but on the recruiting trail, because, a lot of young guys, this is the future where it's going, even though Lane Kiffin, like I said, is the portal king, we've also seen it here. It's just how much that the young guys that we brought in from the high school recruiting aspect have played an impact. So, you want to continue to build on that. Not saying that we shouldn't hit the portal hard, but like I know Lane talked about it during SEC Media Days in the summer, every recruiting cycle is different. And, we went out there, we recruited defensive players, and now this year, what's our need? And, I think definitely, I don't know what you see, but I feel like we need to go out there and recruit some offensive linemen coming in. But again, it just goes to show that there can be a balance, between the success of portal players, but, also winning on the high school recruiting trail, which is very different and dynamic, with the age of NIL and so much more is a big win overall.
For sure. And I think that Kiffin and his coaching staff in particular are very selective over which recruits that they're going to recruit hard, because they are big NIL people and they are a big transfer portal. So for him to be able to, this is very telling of they love this guy and they want him and they're putting the effort in to get him. And I think that that's a really big indicator that Caleb's probably going to be an Ole Miss Rebel.
Yeah. And you had said, Ruby, a few minutes ago that you want to see pen to paper. And that's the skepticism out there in this day and age. There are more and more flips than ever. However, at this late stage of the game, I think we can be fairly confident, a lot more confident than when they're committing, obviously, months and months in advance, where there's a lot of time for there to be negative recruiting on the other side and for flips to happen. So when that commitment's made in late, where are we? Mid to late November, with National Signing Day coming up on December 4th, I think we're in pretty good shape, knowing that Caleb Cunningham's going to stay with that commitment. All right. Before we wrap it up here, any thoughts about the SEC slate coming up this Saturday? Of course, the big one is in Athens, where Georgia's hanging on by a thread to a college football playoff appearance with a second loss against, I don't remember that game last weekend. Anyway, they lost to somebody. Georgia taking on Tennessee, with the Vols coming in with just one loss. And obviously that is the headliner. We outlined LSU's path to the SEC championship game. So despite the 3 losses, they're still playing for a lot. And then the infamous SEC week off for a lot of teams playing scrimmages elsewhere. So, Ruby, what stands out to you?
Yes, for sure. The Tennessee-Georgia game is going to be the big one in Athens. I will be there. And unfortunately, both teams can't lose. So I am hoping for a big Tennessee upset and get Georgia out of contention.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm right there with Ruby on that one. I think all the Ole Miss fans will be looking. I've heard, Georgia win, it looks quality win, but I think that Tennessee, I think Nico will be back. There was talk about, whether he was going to be back, but I feel like Tennessee upsetting Georgia is what Ole Miss fans need, because, like you said, it puts Georgia. I think if Georgia loses at home against Tennessee, I feel like, and where Tennessee stands right now and Georgia stands, I think that it puts them out. I think that's what we want, because, like I said, Ole Miss is teeter-tottering right there in that number 11 spot. And as much as we know that our season should play out the way it should play out, we should come home with those wins. Nothing's guaranteed, but I'm right there with Ruby. I think that's going to be a big highlight game of the week, and I think Ole Miss fans are going to be rooting for Tennessee.
Yeah, and another one too is that Texas at Arkansas game. 2 years ago, when Texas went to Arkansas, they lost. And Fayetteville is a tough place to play. For Longhorn fans, they should be happy that it's only a noon game. But yeah, I think that is kind of one of those games that you need to watch for and look for Arkansas to upset them. They already did it against Tennessee in Fayetteville. And they're a good team. It's a tough place to play. And it also for Ole Miss fans, that Missouri at South Carolina game, the better that South Carolina looks, the better it looks for Ole Miss, who went to South Carolina in Columbia and beat them. So it's really nice that they're a ranked team. Missouri, I know head coach Elia Drinkwitz thinks that Missouri is not out of playoff contention. He mentioned it in his postgame presser that they're still in the mix for playoffs. So hopefully South Carolina shuts that down, because kind of a weird comment from the head coach, but surprisingly, lots of great games. Fingers crossed that LSU at Florida goes into quadruple overtime. But yeah, it'll be a good one.
Absolutes on all accounts. Yes, a lot of weeks off for teams in the SEC, both literally and figuratively in terms of who they're playing. But those 4 games in particular need to keep an eye out on those, because they will have major playoff implications. Ruby, appreciate you being here. Great stuff out of you. Have a great weekend. Have a great football weekend. as you will be in Athens, covering Tennessee and Georgia. And of course, Leanne, we will be back here next week with you and Ruby because Ole Miss is off. So no post game, but of course, you're going to be on the high school recruiting trail. So we'll be back here, everyone, next Wednesday. Ole Miss Live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. So please lock it in, and we will see you next time.
Awesome.
Howdy, toddy.
Thanks, guys. Howdy, toddy.